So how is everyone today on this lovely Sunday evening? It's evening here. I don't know when you're watching this video, but the bike in question that we are going to be going over today is none other than the Trance 29er 3. Today, you are here for what I believe, I don't want to call this a great entry-level full suspension bike because it does retail higher than what I would consider entry level. I like to classify this bicycle as probably the best entry to the high-end market, if that's making sense. So without further ado, let me just introduce you to this bike. It was pre-built. It is a small frame. All right, guys, here it is, the Trance 29-3. So I'm not gonna really go into what I think is better as far as should you be riding a 27.5 or a 29. I am a lover of all things 29er. That does not mean that the 27.5 is a bad wheel size. I think it definitely has its purpose. I'm a 29 guy. So right off the bat, if you look at this color on the interweb, I think it looks bland, to say the least. Now in person, it is much better. It is nothing amazing. I wouldn't probably see this bike out on the trail and go, oh my God, that's amazing. It looks way better in person, like so many Giant bicycles do. I don't know, maybe instead of taking pictures of these things and putting them on a white background, they just need to take short videos of every single bike and have that right underneath these things that you can press play on and see a in-person-ish video. Maybe that would help, maybe. So what is this bicycle actually made for? It is a 29er, it is an Alux SL frame. So Alux SL being the nicest aluminum that Giant produces. It is also 115 in the rear, and it is 130 mil of travel in the front. One thing that I do think is really cool, if it's a full suspension bike from Giant and it is Maestro, all of the Maestro upper rocker arms are forged composite. So even though you're buying an aluminum bike, you still get a carbon rocker. One, I think is smart because it's probably cheaper for Giant just to straight up produce one rocker for all their bikes, but it's cool that this bicycle that retails at what, $2,250 is coming with that carbon rocker. You can get into a lot of reading about travel and geometry and wheel size, but more or less Giant has been producing the 29s with less travel because the way they do their leverage ratios and all of this other nerdy crap you can get into, they claim that this 29er that's got 115 and 130 is like a 27.5 that has more. Take that for what you will. This is full Shimano Deore, so you do have the Shimano Deore rear derailleur, you have the Shimano Deore cassette, and then you also have the Shimano Deore shifter, so it is full Shimano Deore. You take a hit with that crank though, and like I've said before, if I'm gonna take a hit somewhere, I would much rather it be the crank, because the number one thing you're gonna notice with that crank is how heavy it is, but it's not gonna work any less good. That sounds totally dumb. It's not gonna hinder the performance of your shifting or anything like that with having this Praxis Cadet Boost crank on there. It's just a heavy crank. The spindle is small, so it's, I don't know, I would say with a smaller spindle, it's gonna be weaker, but I've also seen this crank set take some big hits and be totally fine. So if we move on to the suspension on this beauty, it is coming with a Marzocchi Z2, 130 millimeter grip damper boost, 15 by 110, 44 millimeter offset, custom tuned for Giant. If you didn't know, Marzocchi was not recently, it's probably been like 2 years now or longer. Marzocchi was actually purchased by Fox. And this was pre-COVID when we had a rep came in, was telling us all about it. And basically he said that Fox wanted to take and make the Fox line of suspension much higher end. And they were gonna use Marzocchi for everything that was like a $500 to $700 fork. Marzocchi was gonna be the more price point suspension. But with that being said, you are still getting essentially a nice Fox fork for the money. I mean, this thing's got the grip damper. It's not a terrible fork whatsoever. A lot of people were a little confused when, you know, the previous few years Fox was coming on this stuff. I think Fox, or Giant for that matter, should definitely advertise a little bit more what Marzocchi is, because Even whenever they first started producing them again, I associated it with the company that went out of business. You know, the handlebars, the stem, all of that jazz is just the contact trail. Great entry-level products, nothing terrible, not super heavy. It's middle of the road, I would say. It is also coming with a contact switch dropper post and the remote, obviously. The brakes are where it gets a little bit odd. This is probably one of the first things I would upgrade on this bike. It is the Shimano MT420 in the front and the MT410 in the rear. On this, it actually says that the Shimano front and rear, or, you know, it's MT420, MT410 hydraulic, 4-piston. With that being said, the rear is not a 4-piston brake. The rear is a 2-piston brake. The front is a 4-piston brake. If you watched the Fathom video that I just did, the nicer Fathom comes with this exact same setup. The 4-piston brakes they're not bad, but these are like the entry-level Shimano brakes. I prefer something a little bit nicer. I especially prefer something that doesn't have these big long lever blades on them. I really like the single-digit blades from Shimano, but I don't want to scare anyone away and say that these things just don't work. It's got some nice big rotors on it. They work just fine, especially for a bike at this price point. The wheels are Giant proprietary wheels. They're nothing amazing, but they work just fine. The hubs never really had any problems out of them. They are already tubeless. This is what they say. They say they are tubeless prepared. They don't say tubeless ready or any of that jazz. It is tubeless prepared. I think that is the best possible way you can describe what it is. So tubeless prepared essentially means they already give you the tape, the valves, and they give you the stands. It's just not installed. So all you have to do, take the valve core out, squirt some stands in said wheel, pump it up, and you're ready to ride. The tires that are mounted to these fabulous wheels are the Maxxis Minion DHFs 2.3s and the Maxxis Aggressor 2.3s. The rear shock, I almost forgot about it. Sorry guys, it is the Fox Float DPS Performance. It is on par with that front fork. It's a good pairing. It's also custom tuned just for Giant. Basically what this means is that rear shock, or even the front shock, they tune it for a Trance 29er 3. A lot of people overlook this. If you go to upgrade that rear shock, it might not ride as well as your cheaper shock unless you get it custom tuned. And now let's take a look at how much this puppy weighs. Yeah, she's chonky, but not overly chonky. I was honestly, 30 pounds is like that's my tipping scale for these bikes. If it's under 30 pounds for this price point, a full suspension bicycle, I'm like, that's pretty good. That's surprising. If it's over 30, that's, you know, normal. And you could easily make this thing way less because there's some chonky parts on it, like that crank, for instance. So in conclusion, what do I actually think about this Trance 29er 3? Like I said at the beginning of the video, I do not classify this as an actual entry-level mountain bike. I think the stance kind of fulfills those shoes. To me, this is an entry to the high end. So what I mean is you can actually get a nicer spec'd bike with like the Stance 1 that's going to come with better components than this bike, but the suspension design is a cheaper suspension design. So what the allure of the Trance line of bikes is that Maestro suspension design. You can get into all the ins and outs of why the Maestro suspension design is nicer than something like what's on the Stance, which is a flex point suspension design. That's for an entirely different video. Once you get to that like $2250 price point, that's the same suspension design that you would get on like the $5,000 Trance. So that's why I kind of classify this as the entry to the high end. I think this is a great bike to build upon. I think it is a good first full suspension bike, but I consider it a little bit nicer than just plain entry level. So yeah, there you go. I hope that helps. Let's move along. I felt it a disservice to skip just about any bicycle, especially if I have the time to crank some of these videos out, because even if you're the 2 people that want to see this bike, I want to be able to show it to you. You know, I really wanted this space to kind of feel like you guys have a really nerdy friend that is just really into bicycles, and you're going over to his house and I'm like, hey, look at this thing, it's pretty cool. But that's all that I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed it. I will see everybody in the next video. Race season is starting soon. I can't wait. I'm getting antsy, so let's just let's do it. Let's go. Bye bye.